Okay, right. Good evening. Yes, so half-time Parsha Shiur this evening. Never run over. That's generally the rule, especially on a Tanis. Don't worry. We want everyone here to try and be home. Now we'll finish 5 past. We need it. Okay. So fast out went 10 past. Yes. So 5 past is fine. Okay. So 2 mitzvahs in this week's Parsha, the final 2 mitzvahs, 612 and 613. Is there a connection between them? And particularly, what exactly can we learn when it comes to this time of the year? Parshas, the mitzvah of Hakel, there is a very well-known Rashi. The mitzvah of Hakel, of course, takes place once every 7 years. The Moed Shnas HaShemitah takes place on Sukkot. I think first day Chol HaMoed Sukkot it was, and then everyone gathered together. Here the king, we say for Dvarim. Pasuk Yud Aleph, Pasuk Yud Aleph. Everyone comes. And the key thing is, everyone has to come. The men, the women, the children, everyone. Says Rashi from Chazal, why did the children come? To bring a reward, to give reward to those who bring them. You have to bring your little kids along in order that there should be a reward for those who bring them, Now, the problem is, says the Kliyakar, like this. He says the implication is that clearly we're talking about children who are not yet at the age of chinuch. Because if they're at the age of chinuch, you're going to bring your kids anyway, aren't you? Because it's a mitzvah of chinuch, like every other mitzvah in the Torah. So we're talking about little children, right? Very small children. Okay? And he says it's very difficult to say that it is a reward for those who bring them. He says he uses this phrase. He says, it's like bringing sticks and stones to the Beis Hamikdash to provide extra reward because it's harder to walk there schlepping the stones along. I mean, if they're beneath the age of chinuch, what purpose can it have in terms of what does that mean that gives a reward to those who bring them? Like you can reward people in all sorts of ways. That's a Kliyakar's problem. What the Kliyakar does with it is that he basically takes this Chazal and goes through a whole piece whereby he expounds that the mitzvah of Hakel was actually all to do with tshuva. That's what it was. The whole thing was about tshuva. Why? Because if you follow through where in the year Hakel was located when it took place, what you have is you have Rosh Hashanah, you have the Aseret Tshuva. Okay, we know that the first day of Sukkot is called Yom Rishon L'Cheshbon Avonos. That's why it says Lokachtem Lachem by Yom HaRishon, because there's simply no time to do Averos between Yom Kippur and Sukkot because you're so busy with all the mitzvahs of Yom Tov, right? Now, and of course we also know that during the Aseret Tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepts the tshuva of individuals as well. Okay, but during the rest of the year, right? That's how the idea is that they the Gemara Rosh Hashanah says it has to be a tshuvas harabim. It's the tshuvas harabim that Hashem accepts, and therefore he says like this: Chazal understood that that first day is the first day of the Cheshbon, okay, and therefore comes along the first day Chol HaMoed, and that is the time, that is the moment when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, now gather together, bring everyone together to ensure that there is an ability to keep alive, keep going, the whole concept of the process of tshuva that begins from Rosh Hashanah. That is why it's specifically to do with a Hakel gathering. Now there's a need for everyone to gather together as one. And he says that is why the idea of bringing the children, because now that if you link it all to do with tshuva, so he says, how do we do tshuva? How do we ask for forgiveness? We just said it. If not for us, that is the essence of tshuva. The essence of tshuva means that we beg Hashem for mercy. If not for us, then for the future generations. We return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu so that He will have Rachmanos not just on us, but also on, we say, even the youngest of the youngest, right? They are included, and our tshuva focuses on them. He says that's the schar l'mevi'ehem min ataf sheyomer lefan v'yisparach asay leman taf elu amavoim b'beis Hashem. The schar, the reward to those who bring them, is the ability for those to be able to say, to literally stand there with their children and say, Hashem, if you have rachmanos on us, and if not, if don't have mercy on us, at least have mercy on our children, And that is how he understands. That is how he understands the reason for Hakel. You'll ask me the obvious question, which he asks and deals with, is why every 7 years then? And the answer is, and this links to something that I mentioned on first day, they spoke about first day Rosh Hashanah, which is the essence of Shemitah is what he says is to bring people together. That's what it does. It makes everyone equal. We're all over. The fields are open. Anyone can come in. And he has a beautiful phrase here. He says, "Beli sofek," he says, he says like, "Kol divrei rivos," all arguments, machlokas nimshochem lemidas sheli sheli, zoma kula sheli. Right? If a person tries to take what I have is only for me, that is the cause of all machlokas, and that's not possible in the Shemitah year, because the essence of Shemitah is to bring about shalom, to bring about peace. And he says you add Shemitah to what Sukkot is, which is you leave your house and you go into the place which reminds you that it's not really yours, because you're in a flimsy place instead of your permanent house. So you've added Shemitah together with Sukkot. There is no better time for the king, the Melech, to be commanded to drive home that message, right? Add up the Shemitah and Sukkot, realize that you're not in this for yourself. Realize that you're in this for everyone, the greater idea. In other words, it's the prime time for tshuva. That is the approach of the Kli Yakar. The Mitzvos Shalom says a slightly different idea. He focuses more on the pasuk says the next pasuk Gimel says v'neihem asher yodu yishmu v'lomdu liyiroa es Hashem Elokeichem kol hayomim. What was the purpose of the whole thing? To fear Hashem. So he says that it's a bit difficult to understand that. He asks many other questions, many other places as well, where you find a similar phrase, because fear of Hashem shouldn't really be the ultimate goal. You would expect, or you would assume, right? What should be the ultimate goal? Avas Hashem, to love Hashem. You've got this incredible moment. You're bringing it once every 7 years. Let's aim high. Right? Let's aim for the highest possible. Right? The highest possible thing is going to be Avas Hashem. What does it mean? We'll gather everyone together. Why? To fear Hashem. Why is that? So he says. It just sort of summarized here. He's a very long piece on it. But basically, what he says is that the way we are created is with a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov, because otherwise there would be no bechira, there would be no free choice. The reality is though, is that Yiras Hashem, to fear Hashem, has a more powerful impact than Avas Hashem. We have to try and get to Avas Hashem, right? But Avas Hashem is, he says, is like it's like comparing to pouring water, whereas the fear, true, genuine Yiras Hashem is almost like the blowtorch effect. He says, it has the ability to purify a person. We say Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of Hashem. Because if you don't start from the position of Yiras Hashem, you'll never be able to get to Avas Hashem. So the purpose and the reason why it's structured in this way, this moment, the moment of maximum impact, right, when everyone is there once every 7 years, you deliberately focus on the aim which can have the biggest impact. It's true that it's not the final word. It's not the final place you want to arrive at, but it's absolutely essential in order to get there. Without Yiras Hashem, without fear of Hashem, there is no ability to really move people and to really enable people eventually to grow. That whole piece of the Mitzvos Shalom, I think is worth it for the final paragraph. It's worth it for the whole thing, for sure. But the final paragraph, he says, "V'lochein tchilas hashana heim hayomim hanoraim." Why do we call them yomim noraim? Why do we call them days of awe? Do we want to live in fear all the time? Rav Soloveitchik had a beautiful way of putting it. He used to say that why is it that we daven of v'chein tein pachtecha, cast your dread. He said he meets eminent psychiatrists who wanted to delete that line. He says they said we spent our whole careers helping people deal with their fears, and here we're saying please make it. He says, Rav Soloveitchik used to answer that on the contrary, when a person has true fear of Hashem, he realizes that the other fears are not real fears. So that's the essence of a Chaim Parsha, to understand that what is real, to have real Yiras Hashem, is to understand that that's the only genuine Yira, whereas the other Yiras are not really genuine. And that's a very powerful idea. He says, that's how we approach Hashem, with Midas HaYira, because they are Yemei Din. That's why we focus on these moments. And he says that was the purpose of Hakel as well. L'man yilmadu v'yoreh es Hashem, es Hashem. Okay, because Yira is Reishis called the beginning of everything. Now, that's Mitzvos Hakel. How does it connect to the Mitzvah Ksiva Sefer Torah? So we can understand, if you look carefully, that the Mitzvah Ksiva Sefer Torah also has a focus on the next generation. There is let's put it like this. How are we understanding now Mitzvah Hakel? Certainly from the perspective of the children, it's a bit like being FFB, right? You're from literally with Hakel. You're actually from birth, literally. You're brought there from the very beginning. You've never seen anything else, right? From that, and not just once every 7 years, but it's a dugma, it's a model, it's a lesson for every other every other aspect of life. Okay. The children, the tough, are being brought to Hakel from the very beginning. From the moment they know anything else, all they know, they're being brought. They're hearing their parents daven for them in Shul Asay Laman, Say Laman Tinoka Shavei Stravan, Say Laman Gmonei Cholov, those who are just still nursing. So they really brought up from the very beginning, not knowing anything else. What's the danger? The danger is if you're born into something, you take it for granted. You take it for granted. Says the Ksav Sofer. The Ksav Sofer doesn't make this link between the mitzvahs, but I'm suggesting this link. Ksav Sofer says like this: the mitzvah Ksiva Sefer Torah, we learn, the Gemara Sanhedrin says, Mishe niech lo oviv Sefer Torah, mitzvah lichtov mishaloi. If you're left, you inherit Sefer Torah, you still have to write your own Sefer Torah. And he says, you see from there, that why is that? Why should that be? What's the problem? I've got a Sefer Torah. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to use it. Why should I have to write my own Sefer Torah? It's a waste of money. Why do I have to write it? Says the Ksav Sofer. Yesh l'ramez bozeh shelo tia lanu haTorah mitzvos anoshim mulamodo. Because the main lesson is that we should not take it for granted. It shouldn't be something we're just accustomed to, used to. Ela kol echad yikabla al atzmo mechodosh ki lo omed b'Har Sinai. Everyone has to accept the Torah as if they themselves stood on Har Sinai, and that is why there is a mitzvah to write it oneself. Okay, and there is that, and then he said, and even further than that, he says, what is it? Why does the Torah saying, "Write a Sefer Torah"? It's trying to, the Torah is trying to convey a message that you need to make your own chidushim in the Torah. Shechadesh bo dvarim, right? Understand, he brings the Mishnah in Ovis. It's not something that's an inheritance from your ancestors. It's something you have to make your own. And that's why, even if you inherit the Sefer Torah, you need to write your own Sefer Torah. So perhaps we can suggest that the two mitzvahs in this way beautifully complement each other. Mitzvahs Hakel is about, and it has to be that way. You want to raise your children from the very beginning to know nothing else other than what it means to be a Jew. Of course, that's what we have to do. That's essential. Otherwise it can have a much have a disastrous effect. But it has a danger. The danger is they take it for granted. They don't own it for themselves. Comes along the very final mitzvah of the Torah, Tariag, and says, it's not enough just to say, I was born into it, this is how it is. You have to make it your own. Write your own Sefer Torah, and it's going to cost you a fortune. And it's a big deal to write your own Sefer Torah. And you say, I've got one I inherited. It doesn't matter. The Torah says that the two have to complement each other. You can be born into something, and that is a wonderful, wonderful gift. People are privileged to be born into, or privileged to raise their children in that environment. Should never ever forget what a tremendous chus that is. But it should also try and convey that message, that mitzvah's tariag, that every single person in life needs to be koina, needs to acquire their own chelek, their own portion in Torah, because that's the only way they will truly grow, and that's the only way they'll come to realize ultimately what it means to be a Jew, what it means to go through, especially particularly this time of year, that message of the Nesiva Shalom, of the Yom Noraim, to learn for oneself what Yiras Hashem is, and eventually to come through that to Avas Hashem. Thank you all very much. The next Shiur Vayelech Hashem, we Parshas Bereshis, Shabbos Bereshis, Thursday, day after Simchas Torah. Look forward. Okay, Gmach Simcha Tova.